So, the next part, logic. The plan I had for this was to have it contained within a blueprint component, so we would have all the codes compartmentalized inside of there. And then it would be communicating with the character, which in turn will be communicating with the inventory, and the inventory to the character, and the character back to the crafting system, essentially. So we'll get started on that, and then we'll explain as we go along why we're doing things, and the choices of why we're placing different things in different parts. So we wanted to create a new blueprint, and we want it to be a blueprint. Second component, an actor component. Now, this actor component is going to be essentially the knowledge of the character, so the recipes that he knows. So we'll call this BPC for blueprint component underscore and recipe book. And we can open that one up. So this one will, we want to remove inherited things so we don't see as much stuff there. So we want to have this be called at different points. So starting situation would be a player wants to craft something. Now let's go to our third person character and create an event. So we can do keyboard E, which will bring up the E key, and you should be doing inputs for this, but to start off we'll be doing it this way. And then you say the E key represents the start crafting input. Actually, let's do it proper. Let's go to the inputs. So we'll go to project settings and input, and add an action mapping and start crafting. And we'll choose the E key. I do not want the N key, I want an E key. There we go. So now we have the E key for that mapped. We'll close down the project settings, we'll go back to our third person character, we'll type in start crafting. There we have an action event, and we'll make use of that instead, like so. So now we essentially want to say we want to craft something. And how we're going to determine this is by saying that when this happens, we're going to communicate with our not our inventory, let's actually add that already. So BPC recipe book, like so. So now we have that component here. We basically want to say, in this recipe book, are we allowed to craft right now? So we right click on this recipe book and we convert it to a validated get, so we make sure that we have it properly instantiated when we try to do something like this. And then we want to have a function that checks if we can craft. So we'll go back to our recipe book. Let's close down everything else for now. So we have our recipe book. Let's create a custom event here. Let's say open recipe crafting. This is the event that we will be calling when we want to craft something. No. Let's keep that for later. Let's make another custom event. Let's do an attempt. Open crafting. Yeah, that's a better name. So this will be the event that we call when we want to start crafting something. So we'll go back here to our third person character and we say attempt open crafting. So that's all that we're doing essentially now here. Now, on the recipe book side, what we will be doing is we will be doing some basic checks. We will be getting our owner, which means that we're getting this third-person character in this case. We will be getting overlapped actors to make sure what actors are currently overlapping this character, and we don't need to set a filter for this currently. And then we need to loop on these. And we could do a loop and break. So let's do that. Loop with break. Because what we want to do is now the check that we talked about earlier, which is, are we able to craft right now, which is predicated or allowed by being near a crafting bench or being in a safe space like a base. So what we want to do is we want to check all the actors that are currently overlapping us. Do they allow us to craft? So we say does implement interface, and here we type in BPI craft enabled. This is the interface that we created earlier. It doesn't even have a function in it. The only reason it exists is for us to be able to do this check. So we will add an if here by pressing B, for example, holding down and left clicking, and then we'll tag the results from our check in there. Now we will know if we are able to craft. So what we will do is we want to first determine what we are able to craft, because as a response from this, we're going to communicate back to the character that yes, you can craft, but that will also want us to show in the inventory or in the user interface rather, that we are going to craft. So what we want to do here is we want to get our recipes. That's our first step over here. And then after that, we want to send it back to the player, the recipes that we have, and then allow the user to make use of that information. So if they had a different inventory system than we had, then they would have the information available to display, and they would send it to that inventory instead. So let's create another interface, one that allows us to send this information. So we'll go to blueprints, blueprint interfaces. We can call this BPI crafting, for example. And opening that up, we want to create a function, and we can say start crafting UI. And what we want to send to this interface is the information about our recipes. So we can type in a recipe, the structure that we have, make it an array because there might be multiple recipes, and we say that these are our crafting recipes, like so. We go back to our recipe book, and now we say we want to call on this interface that we just created. So we right click and start craft UI, start crafting UI. So we need to get the recipes here, and we need to send it to this person. And our person, we know who it is because we determined it earlier, is our owner, because we are a blueprint component to a player. So this step is all that remains over here essentially, and then we need to go back to our character to actually receive this. So first let's start off with, how do we get our recipe list, or how do we get the recipes that we have available to us? Well, one of the things that we can do is we create a variable here which represents our known recipes. So this will be the knowledge of the player essentially. We will make this of the type data table row handle and compile that, and then we say that we want to have it of the type recipe, and we want it to be off wall. Then we want to actually make this an array, so we have multiple ones, like so. Then we have to add it again because then I lost it. So we'll make it recipes and we'll make it a wall. We'll do another recipe and we'll do it for recipe and wooden board. So now we have determined that these are the recipes that the character knows. How do we get them, or all the information that's related to them? Because we only defined a handle to a data table. Well, we can create a function. Let's do that function. We can call this get full recipe list. And this one wants to get all the recipes that we have currently. So we can do, a fast way to do this is to either set recipes and then drag it in here so we actually get the link immediately. Then we want to loop on these, like so. So we're going through all the different recipes that we have, and we want to get that information. Now we can make another function to compartmentalize this even further. So we can call this get full recipe from table, for example. So what this one will do is it will take one specific recipe and it will use, so again, this is one fast way to fix it. We can just drag a connector like this so we get recipes, but we don't want multiples. So we'll change this back to, actually this is not a good way to do this, because now it will be a data table row here. We want to have it of the type recipe, like so. So we can say here that this is the recipe what we want to know about. So we'll get it as a input like so. This one we can break, so we get different components for it. Actually, let's actually have this. I changed my mind. Let's have this as a known recipes anyway. We'll do it like this, so we get all of them. And then, because we are actually sending a handle, because we had it in the loop, remember? So it's not a known recipe, but it is a recipe, or a handle to a recipe, like so. And this we can actually break down and have data table row, sorry, a data table and a row name for. So now we can do get data table, and we want to get a specific table row. We'll hook it up like so. We could be taking this data table, although we know that in all these cases, since this is getting recipes, we know we want to have the recipe data table, and we'll just plug in the row name. This will now go to the database table and retrieve all the relevant information for this, which means that it will get the crafted item and all the crafting components needed. We can now type in our return node, have multiples of those. We can take an out row to this first one and say that if we find something, that's what you're returning. If you do not find something, you will return a blank row, essentially. Compile and save. We go back to our get full recipe list. And now we can make a call to this get full recipe from table, a function that we created. So what we want to do with this result? Well, we want to send this out. So we need to make a local variable to store it temporarily. So we can say that this is our local recipe list. Our local recipe list, though, however, will not be of the type that we had the data table row. It will be of the actual recipe, like so. It will be an array, though, however, because we might have multiples of them. So we take this local recipe list, we get it, we say add unique to it, and then we add whatever result we get from this function over here. So we'll go through all of the different known recipes that we have. We get the data table result from them, we add them to our array over here, and then we want to return them. So we'll add a return node, which we will be calling on our complete. And then we can take our local recipe list and just hook it up there, so we have our return node like so. We could rename it to something better, like our recipe details or something like that. There we go. Okay, so now we have a function for this. We can go back to our event graph and we can say we want to make use of the getting full recipe list. We can say we want to call it. We can say that when we're done we want to go there. And the details we get out from here are the ones we're sending back there. The known recipes that we want to know of are the defined ones that we have specified already in our blueprint component. And that is that whole part done now, essentially. So if you want to change what kind of recipes the player knows, then this is the array that you will be changing that. So you can have this either start off as an empty one, create some methods to add recipes over time, like when they learn certain things or when they reach certain levels or something like that, and then just populate this array, which is simple because all it's containing is the recipe table and the actual name of the row. And then this function will just handle getting all of those from the database table and sending it further to our player, essentially. So that means that you can contain all of that logic inside of the recipe book here. So that's that part done. Let's get back to our third-person character. So now that we have pressed the key and we want to craft, we have sent the message to the recipe book, which has determined that we are able to craft something, and it's sending back a message to us now saying, these are the recipes that we know of. Do something with them. We created a blueprint interface to be able to handle this. We need to add that to our class settings. So we go to add a blueprint interface, and BPI crafting is what we named it. That will allow us to get the start crafting UI function. We can implement that interface over here. From here, what we can say is we want to add this information to our user interface, our HUD. So we have a HUD reference over here. We can get that one. We can right click, convert it to a validated get to make sure that we have it available when we try to do something. And now we want to actually send these recipes to it and say, do something with that. So now we need to get to our HUD and actually start working on some functionality to take these recipes and do something with it there. So let's compile and save. We will go to our inventory folder and open up our WHUD interface or widget. The very first thing we need to do is to determine where do we want this crafting inventory to be. So we can take our inventory system, which is the WCrafting, and we drag it into our canvas panel. It ends up in the top left. It ends up with a anchor to the top left, and this is fine in my opinion. This is where we could have it, but if you wanted to have it somewhere else, that's fine. You can just anchor it somewhere else you want and place it in a position that you feel is more convenient, essentially. But what we want to do now is add the functionality of being able to craft. So to do that, we can remove some of these events we won't be needing. We can create a custom event here. We can call it open recipe crafting, for example. So this will be the event that will be called from the third person character saying, we want to craft, this is what we know. So we can add an input here, and we can make it of the type as recipe, make it an array, because we're sending multiples, and we'll say that these are our known recipes. Compile and save. Now, what we have since we created this over here, this W crafting, is that we get an actual reference to that widget. So we can grab that one here. We can right click on it and make it a validated get to make sure that we are actually only working with a valid reference. Now we have two different situations here. Most likely, most of the time you will have an existing reference. Some of the times you will not have, but then you need to create one. So let's start with the creating of one. So we want to create a crafting widget. So we do that here, create widget, and we say we want it of the type W crafting, like so. Now we can immediately see that we don't have any information other than owning player being sent into this one, and we want to convey to it that we have recipes here. So what we want to do is we want to go into our crafting widget and we want to change it slightly so that it can actually receive recipes. So if we go to our widgets over here, the one that says crafting, go to graph. If we go in here and say we want to have a new variable and we want to say that this is our recipes, and we do it of the type as recipe and make it an array, make it instance editable and expose on spawn. This will allow it to show up when you try to create a widget of this type, which we can see if we go back to HUD now and refresh this node. You can see that recipes appear. So we'll drag in our known recipes in there, like so. And then that part is essentially done for that. When we have created a widget like this, we want to make sure that we are able to make use of the user interface. So we will be creating a, we get the owner, owning player, and we say we want to set our input mode. We want it to be UI only, because now we're going to be interfacing with the user interface only. In addition to that, we can also show mouse cursor and make sure that it's being shown when we're doing this, like so. We can place it like this for now, because we will be getting a line up here as well, which will also be doing this. So now we have, if we come here, we don't have a valid reference. We create a widget for crafting, we send in the recipes, and then later on we will deal with how it actually makes use of that. We get that widget, and we also then tell our player that we want to have the input mode to be UI only, so no controlling the character, and we want it to show the mouse cursor. This is all good and fine. So let's handle the other option here of possibly already having the reference done earlier. This will happen when we will be creating this the first time we actually try to open our crafting user interface, and all the other times we have open after that, we would have the reference properly set, essentially. So then we essentially just want to show that widget. So this widget over here, we would set the visibility of this one to be visible, and then we would be setting our input mode to be UI only, and we would be setting our mouse cursor. So essentially what we can do is, let's see if we can do this in a prettier way. Something like that, and then say continue from there, because from here it's going to be the same logic essentially. Maybe so. Okay, But there is one problem, however, because when we create it the first time, we send in and say, these are our recipes, but we're not doing it in this part over here when we already have it created. So we need to update our UI about saying, these are the recipes you're going to be showing this time. So we will be creating a function in our crafting UI, which allows to set these recipes. So we go to our crafting UI, crafting widget. We remove some of these functions that we have available to us. And what we will be doing is some of the logic that we will be needing. First of all, we have a crafting item container that we named earlier. If we drag that one out, this one we have for our own visual sake just said that these are the different recipes that we should be showing, but that's only for display. So we will start off by clearing them out. So clear the children so that we can still have the benefit of seeing them available here. So we see what it would look like visually, but not be affected by it once we actually start using it. After that, we want to update with our actual recipes. So to do this, we will create a custom event. Update recipes, we'll call it. And what this will do is it will go through all of our different recipes that we have available to us and then set up some logic so we can actually interact with them. To start off with, we will have our recipes that we have over here. We bring them out and we loop on these. This is functionality that will run when we have constructed it the first time and then update the recipes. I see that I have named this one a little bit improperly. Let's fix that. Like so. But this doesn't handle the situation where we are updating our reference with our new recipes, like I spoke about a moment ago. So we need to create another custom event which will allow that. We can call that set known recipes. And we'll make sure that it's an input of the structure recipes, make it an array. We can say that these are our recipes. And we will set the recipes, this variable that we have locally in the widget here, to be that information that we're being sent here. And then we want to call update recipes, so this function up here. So now we see that both the constructor here, the constructor over here, will be clearing it out, and then it will be calling the update recipe function. Or we have an already created one and we'll just update the recipes and then we'll call the update recipes. So they will be calling the same flow essentially. So what we want to do with this? Well, for each of the recipes we want to create a widget now and we want to place it inside of our container over here, just like one of these two. So we will say create widget, and the type of widget we want to create is of the crafting item type. So the recipe type essentially then. And now immediately we see the same problem that we had before, that this widget doesn't actually take any information to show what it is. So we want to expose something for this widget as well. So we'll open up that widget, so crafting item, and we'll say a graph, and we say we want to have a variable, and we'll say it's called recipe, make it of the type as recipe, and we expose it on spawn and make it instance editable, compile and save. and go back to crafting, and now we refresh this and we can see that we get the recipe in here. So since we're looping in recipes, we can just send the recipe in here and we're done with that part essentially. Now it will behoove us to keep track of all of these widgets that we create, because it allows us to do some communication later on. So what we will be doing is we will be creating another array of variables, which we will be calling recipe widget reference, which will be of the type w crafting item object reference and an array of it. This is so that when we created this widget, we can there we go, add to this array. So this newly created widget we have added over here. So that's all good and fine. But this means that whenever this is called, this will just be kept adding on all the time. So we need to clear it at some point. So a good place to clear it would be at the start of this update. So we'll do a clear over here. So we have that done. So it's always starting from a fresh start hill. So why do we want to have these widgets? Well, or widget references. Well, it is for us to be able to communicate later on when we're actually clicking on specific recipes. But for now, that's not actually going to be that necessary. So we can actually ignore the rest of this logic for now. So we'll get back to that a little bit later, essentially. Now we have enough for us to go back to our HUD. And in our HUD, we can now say we want to set our known recipes. Let's see if we can make this prettier, like so. Something like that. So when we have our reference already created earlier, we set our recipes over here. And then we set the visibility of it. And then we set the input mode and set everything like that, and everything is fine. We will be needing something to close this off later on as well. So we might as well do that now. So we'll create a custom event. We can call this close recipe crafting. And what we want to do is we want to do the same thing that we did before here. We want to change our visibility, but from visible we want to go to hidden. So we get our reference over here, set visibility, and say that it's hidden, so we're closing it down. And after that we want to return to have our input game mode changed. So we can copy this, can drag it up here. Actually, that's bad. We don't want the UI only mode. We want the set, input, game, and UI we can actually go with. Should be fine. So like so. And we are not making use of this right now, but we'll get back to that later on. And that should be all we need here for right now. This means we can go back to our third person character now. We can go and say that our HUD ref is supposed to open recipe crafting when this happens. And the recipes that we're sending in are the ones that it's supposed to be retrieving. And then the UI itself will handle how to deal with those different recipes, essentially. So this is all the code that we need here for the character. It's essentially asking, can I craft? It gets this message saying, yes, you can craft, and this is what you're able to craft. It goes and says, hey, UI, these are the things I can craft, and the UI will go about and displaying them in some manner for the player. We don't have all of the code available right now for doing this properly, but we will be continuing that momentarily. Going back to our HUD, we can go to its designer, we can click on the crafting, and we can make sure that it's starting off as hidden, so it doesn't show in the beginning. And then if we start playing, we should be able to run up to the crafting table and press E, and you can see that this is what it looks like. So we get our user interface, even though it's looking completely wrong right now. And it's not showing us the recipes we do know. It's not showing the details properly because it's showing us the stuff that we just had as placeholders. But that's good enough for now. So we will be continuing this in the next part. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you did not like it, leave a dislike. Leave any suggestions or comments you have down below. Subscribe and share this video if you want to see more like it in the future. That is all for now. Keep on learning. Take care.